Hello, everyone, and welcome to Children in the Fields campaign. My name is Kendra Mosley, and I'm joined today by a special guest, Betsy Wood. She is an author and historian, and she wrote the book on child labor in America. So we invited her here today to talk about that a little bit, since we are very much interested in child labor in America. So we talk about all the time. Um, and so her book is called Upon the Altar of Work, and was just published by the University of Illinois Press on September 14th, so just a few weeks ago. And in the book, apologies for the background noise. In the book, just one moment. In the book, she goes into the history behind the Fair Labor Standards Act, which governs. Sorry for the interruption. In the book, Betsy goes into the history behind the Fair Labor Standards Act, which we talk a lot about here. It was passed in 1938, but of course, agriculture and non-agriculture were treated separately and have a separate set of rules that has resulted in the exploitation of children in America still today. And the book ends in 1938, doesn't discuss the current situation of ag versus non-ag, but we can fill in those gaps, and we often do. So we don't often get the chance to go into the history and the hows and the whys. So that's why we brought Betsy here today. So welcome to Betsy.
Thank you.
Just a few things to note before we get started. If you're joining us on Facebook, please put your name in the chat and where you're joining us from. And get some questions ready. You know, we have Betsy here to answer the questions. This is a great opportunity for you to really pick her brain on the topic, and then we'll have a question and answer at the end. I have a few questions prepared that we'll start with. And as always, you know, all of our previous live streams have been saved on our website at afop.org/CIF. It's on the 8th tab. And we also just want to thank everyone who's joined us to date with the Live Thursday project. It's been a lot of fun, and I enjoy talking to you every week. And I hope you're not tired of me. So I'll pivot over to Betsy. Betsy, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes. So again, thank you for inviting me to come talk about my book. I am obviously really excited to talk about it, and especially with you guys working in this this important field. So thank you. So I live in Jersey City, New Jersey. I teach American history at the Hudson County Community College, and I'm in my third year of teaching there. And I love my job. Prior to teaching, I have a bit of a nonprofit background. For a few years, I worked as a consultant for Good Weave International. So if there's anybody out there that remembers me from those days, and I was also at the Institute for Policy Studies for 2 years before going back into teaching. So, and now my book is out, and yeah, I'm excited to speak with you.
That's wonderful. Yes, we are Children in the Fields campaign is partners with Good Weave on a child labor coalition, so we know them well. Yes. So I want to talk about the book. Can you show it to us? Yes. Can you bring it up to the screen
yes,
a little more close?
Absolutely.
So it's Upon the Altar of Work. Can you tell us, if you can, just to summarize it in 5 minutes or less, and also the title? Can you tell us what the title means?
Yeah. So. The book traces the history of child labor and especially debates about it. So, looking at it not just as an issue that arose and became a problem and then was abolished, but rather how there were disagreements about it and really a battle that went on, from around the 1850s, so before the Civil War. to the 1930s, kind of culminating in the passage of the Fair Labor Standards Act as part of the New Deal. And, you know, what I found in the book was a much more complicated history of these debates. And I believe the first book on this to really give equal weight to the counter movement that developed opposing regulation, opposing government intervention, especially federal, around this issue, and understanding the movement to abolish child labor as one that had opponents that were very well organized and mobilized to prevent the changes that reformers want for just as many years as the reform movement went on. And I think most people aren't aware of sort of the battle around child labor and the legacy that that battle has bequeathed to us, which I believe is just as important, you know, to understand as the actual legislative victory that was ultimately secured. A partial victory, I think I would call it, in the FLSA.
Absolutely. Yes, our work is not done 100 years later, and we're still fighting that legacy and the perception of that legacy. So, and the title, Upon the Altar of What?
Yes. So, Upon the Altar of Work, I was looking for something that would capture the disagreement that I found. And, you know, one of the really striking things is that because the book starts in the 1850s, the nation was really focused on the conflict over slavery at that time. So it was a north-south sort of dynamic that defined this debate in the 1850s. And in a way that might surprise you, it was that child reform in the North was very much focused on free society, free capitalist society being better than slave society, and showing that this was true because of labor, that labor is something that has virtue, it's something that should lead to social mobility. And this was a very important cornerstone of the anti-slavery movement based in the North. Whereas pro-slavery Southerners were talking about things like the rise of industrial child labor in factories being a sign that Northern free society wasn't superior, and that slavery, that it was hypocritical to say that Southern slavery was somehow, you know, way worse than capitalism and all of this. So what I wonder had anyone traced those debates from that moment all the way to the 1930s, when industrial child labor became such an iconic issue of the modern industrial period. And that was the thing that no one had looked at. So Upon the Altar of Work, on the one hand, reformers were talking about children being sacrificed, that they were being sacrificed on an altar of labor, that profit had become the motive above everything, and that sacrificing children was somehow worth, you know, as long as profit was gained, and that this was the way they were using the altar. You know, I found images of children upon altars as if they were literally being sacrificed in the name of labor, in the name of profit. And on the other hand, the opponents of reform continued to talk about an ideal of labor, of work, as being virtuous, as something that was healthy, particularly farm labor, not exclusively, but later in this debate, there is a very strong component of the opposition that continues to believe in the value and virtue of labor, and that was being sacralized in a way that I thought also captures the altar of work in a different way. So Upon the Altar of Work is meant to show the two different ways of kind of the conceptions of work.
That's fascinating. Yeah, and so you said the reformers were saying that children were being sacrificed to this ideal of the capitalism. But was it all children, or was it? You mentioned that it was racially motivated in a way.
Yes. So one of the really striking things that I found was how there was almost a hierarchy of victimization. So that in particular, poor white children in the South, who were a very large proportion of the workforce in Southern textile mills, that was one of
Mhm.
the iconic industries in the new South, the post Civil War South. They were hiring entire families in poor white regions of the rural South. And that became kind of the issue that launched the whole movement. So there was a reformer, Edgar Gardner Murphy, who focused specifically on the race of these children. And this is in an age when, you know, the Jim Crow system of segregation is being consolidated in the South. It was an age when, in the late 19th century, you had the rise of American imperialism with the Spanish American War of 1898 and a very strong nationalistic and white supremacist discourse around the strength of the nation being based in the vitality of the white race. And so the argument was that if these children are being deteriorated physically and mentally, that's weakening the American nation, the future, and the ambitions of the American nation for global dominance. And you've even had senators on the floor of the United States Congress making this argument very openly. Like, this isn't something I had to read into, you know, to discover. It was very openly discussed by, you know, powerful white men in both the North and in the South. So Senator Albert Beveridge, to give you a concrete example, from Indiana, stood on the floor of the United States Congress and made this argument about child labor, specifically in the South, employing white children was a problem for the nation, and that was why we needed to do something about it. They needed to make sure that, you know, this practice didn't continue. So absolutely, race very much shaped the debates in a way that, you know, is somewhat unexpected, because while it united Northern and Southern white reformers initially, they actually split into different camps when it came to federal intervention around the issue. And ultimately, that disagreement led to some of the same people that started out being reformers becoming opponents of any sort of meaningful federal regulation around the issue, but with this white supremacist discourse being used on both sides.
It does make you wonder. You know, we share pictures all the time, especially by our friend Robin Romano, who passed away several years ago, of Latinx girls and boys in the fields. You know, if they were white, would people be more outraged? And just the way they were 100 years ago. And this is still going on, you know, 100 years later. And where's the outrage? You know, it really makes you
Yeah,
wonder.
yeah. I
Because,
mean,
go ahead.
my view is that the past shapes the present, and, you know, whether consciously or unconsciously, you know, this is a strong legacy from this movement around child labor. So, for example, the images that were the most circulated and that caused, you know, kind of public outrage because they were sensationalized in the Northern press were actually called a white slavery scare. So there was a whole discourse around an entire, you know, genre of anti-child labor journalism that specifically focused on the fear of white slavery. So I think, you know, absolutely that legacy is still, we haven't overcome. I don't think we've overcome this idea of there being, you know, a hierarchy of victimization that is sort of subject to the whims of how people react to it emotionally.
Exactly. And my coworker Vashta is making the point that there are senators today, and you've made this point in an op-ed, and I'll share that in the chat as well. You wrote the op-ed on this parallel between the arguments that they were making 100 years ago and then the arguments that they were making in 2012 to defeat the update of the hazardous occupation. So talk a little bit about that while I go look for the link for the op-ed.
Yeah. So in 2012, I had actually I had just completed graduate school and my dissertation, which was the basis. The research I did for my dissertation was the basis for this book.
Okay.
And I remember seeing a headline about this issue, and it was specifically that, I mean, by the time I saw it, it was that there had already been a backlash, and there had already been, I saw the headlines about that. I believe it was Sarah Palin that had made a comment about children. The Obama administration did not want to allow children to do chores on the family farm anymore, and that these were outrageous, kind of an outrageous new proposal from the Department of Labor to interfere with the private family farm and what your own children could do on the family farm. And it was like I was having, this moment of the past and the present just colliding, because these arguments were exactly the same ones that were used 100 years ago to stop, the regulations that reformers wanted back then. And they were all around kind of this urban, rural dynamic, that there is a set of different values, and that those who are pushing reform are based in urban settings, that they have no idea what happens on farms, that they have a, sort of out of touch way of approaching these issues, and that kind of coupled with the idea that parental authority is going to be interfered with, that parents, are the ones that should make decisions about the labor of their own children, was very powerful 100 years ago. And it did prevent, for example, a constitutional amendment that reformers tried to get in the 1920s, that the entire establishment supported it. It seemed like something that was going to happen, especially coming on the heels of women's suffrage and prohibition. Amendments were kind of popular in the progressive era as a way of gaining reform, reaching or achieving reform goals. And so child labor reformers wanted to be part of that, and they very much thought they were going to be. And then the amendment was defeated. So I don't know how much you want me to go into, the movement to defeat it, but there was an entire, organized campaign that was actually funded by the Southern Textile Association, led by Mr. David Clark, and the National Association of Manufacturers. They kind of got together and they, funded this opposition, which did have a lot of grassroots support, but they were the ones sending, literature and pamphlets to farm families and informing them about the real agenda behind the constitutional amendment, which, reformers, they panicked and, tried to clear up this misinformation and spent the rest of their time, trying to combat the misinformation, and then they lost the battle.
There's a little bit of drama in my house right now. Can you hear me?
Hey, I'm a mom. I get it.
So Vashta, my coworker, she's worked on children in the fields for a long time. She says there's a play on words that is often misused, often purposefully, to advance the agenda of big ag. Obscuring the whole purpose, really, of any updates in the law or the regulations, and scaring farm families into thinking that they're coming after us. They're coming after our families. They're going to try to regulate the chores, like you pointed out in that op-ed that I plugged into the chat if anyone's interested. And it's true, and it happens again and again, and we get weary of it, the advocate community, because we're like, this is clear. If we would just stop obscuring the issue, this is for farm worker kids who are not related to the owners who are being taken advantage of repeatedly and for now a whole century since all the children in every other industry has been protected. So I don't know if someone could tell me who's on the chat if they can still see Betsy. I can't see her, but I can still hear her. Because I don't want to refresh if everyone else can see Betsy. Apologies for the background noise.
I'm still able to see myself.
Okay,
if
great.
That counts for anything.
I think it's just me. So I'll just keep going. Okay, good. And we also had someone from our membership, Jesus Rivera, said that, the economics of child labor 100 years ago were the same for her and her family in present day. When she was growing up, she had to go to work at the age of 8, work alongside her parents and 10 other siblings. Families don't have a place to send their kids, so they take them along to the fields, and that's the reality of agriculture today. And it's mind-blowing that this is still going on when we think we've solved the issue. Like child labor, it's been put to rest, no worries, but it hasn't.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the histories that we learn about child labor in America do have, I call them progress tales. So, this is not uncommon in American history because it is kind of a feel-good narrative that we made great progress on this issue, that it's something very bad that used to exist, and that thankfully there was a victory and that this is no longer with us. And it's a very, it's very misleading, and it's not helpful to continue repeating this type of history because it doesn't serve, it actually serves the interest of what you're talking about, those who are trying to continue preventing, meaningful reform. So I think, I'm hoping that this can be, in addition to being a contribution to scholarship, that this can also be a useful, history for present day efforts to clear through some of this, muddled understanding of where we are today.
And that is our hope as well. And it just tickled me when I first, made your claims over email, because you said, oh, I wrote something in the Conversation, which is an online platform, I guess. And I don't think they're print, but they're online only outlet media. And I said, yeah, I saw that article and I noticed it because it sounded markedly different from every other article I've read on child labor. If people don't know, if they don't dig into this, they accept the glossy, feel-good narrative that we've solved this, and it plays into it. It sounds exactly like some other conversations that we've been having lately, like Black Lives Matter. Like there's this narrative we've in civil rights era we solved that problem, like we're done, but we're not, and there's still a lot of work to do.
Exactly. I do think there are a lot of parallels there. And I do think that there is a tendency, especially in some older scholarship. I think that American historians in the academy, do today have much more of a nuanced, complicated understanding of these issues. The problem is that the popular understanding often lags behind where the academic scholarship is. And so I think with this issue, I'm hoping that, this can be the beginning of a more complicated, not the beginning, I don't want to imply, there have been many other historians that have done great work around this issue, but specifically around kind of understanding the battle of this and how that legacy of a disagreement is really the one that has shaped our present moment, even just as much, if not more so, than the victories secured by reformers.
Exactly. So, bringing us up to present day and the work that we're still trying to do to, introduce these measures, the Child Labor Coalition does a great job leading the charge on this. There's the CARES Act, which proposes to close the loopholes in the Fair Labor Standards Act so that all industries are treated equally and child labor is completely outlawed and properly regulated. And then there's the Children Don't Belong on Tobacco Farms Act as well, which neither one of these has yet to be passed and sent to the Senate. Check me on that. I'm pretty sure they get the same number of co-signers every session, and then they die because they're never brought to the floor. So what do you think it will take for them to gain traction finally and get passed, based on your reading of history?
Yeah, well, I'm not a fortune teller, but I do think that history, can inform how we understand the present. And certainly, I think understanding what has prevented change in the past can be a good indicator for the same forces that prevent change in the present. And certainly in the past, I think that reformers were often, kind of caught off guard by how well organized that the opposition was, just as much as they were, and stealthy, right? Like doing it in a way that was surprising, and in a way that wasn't talking about the interest that they really had. So for instance, one of the things I didn't mention before is that the opponents weren't just focused around trying to exclude one part of labor, such as agricultural labor. These were manufacturers that were really trying to prevent meaningful regulation of child labor in their own factories, and they didn't want any of these kind of federal interventions. So the naked interest that they had was simply trying to retain cheap labor, in their factories, and not having the government to interfere with that in any way. But by shifting the debate to red herrings, other issues that were not the basis of what they were really up to, that they found that was much more successful, right? And so I think that is a pattern of we can look at capitalists in America. In some ways, this is a history of American capitalism and the ways in which capitalists, not just individual entrepreneurial people, but that they have organized politically to reach their own goals, their own political goals, and to make sure that they are retaining the kind of power that they need in society in order to have the profits that they want and all of that. So I think kind of being aware of that is one step. Like, what are the lobbying interests that are behind preventing this reform today? And then I think just more public awareness about the issue. I think most people don't know, for example, about the disparity between industrial child labor regulations and agricultural child labor regulations, and that they are completely different, and that there's a reason for that. So I think kind of what you guys are doing basically to educate people about that disparity.
Yes, and it just sounds so familiar. And you wrote about this in your op-ed. But the whole talking point was so underhanded that they used to defeat the hazardous occupations regulation from being updated. And they said that power-driven tools could mean something as simple as a flashlight, and that's just so simply not true. Right. But it worked. It was repeated and used to stoke people's fears. And I have relatives who still have a very guttural, emotional memory about it, because the Ag Bureau, it went far. The campaign went really deep to every farming family. And so they were convinced. They were like, oh, the government's going to come and take away the ability for our kids to even use a flashlight on our family farm. And that wasn't it at all.
Exactly.
So I wanted to also share that, wow, Jesus said that she earned about $10 a week when she was working as a farm worker child, which is pennies. So clearly this is in somebody's interest, not the kids, to keep them working. And the thing that we often come up against is the poverty then of the families is really what's at stake here. What's at the heart of it, because as long as those families are impoverished, there's going to be motivation for kids to work to try to lift their family out of the poverty. But if the kids are only earning $10 a week, that that doesn't really, I know it's like when you're really poor, every little bit helps.
Yes.
But then people, they say, oh, we don't have the money to pay farm workers a little bit more, but that's simply not true. So very little of the cost of our fruits and vegetables even goes to the farm worker at the beginning of that line of production. And so we have partners, the Equitable Food Initiative and also the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, who have great initiatives where they guarantee that there's a bonus that goes straight to the workers. There's a certification program, and it works really well. The places that are where the food is sourced are checked up on regularly, and the workers are interviewed, and they are paid a lot better, and so it helps to eliminate that motivation for child labor.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because one of the things I have thought about, just based in what I learned in this historical research, is how it is so important, not for change to be based in kind of the emotional reactions that people have, because as long as we're stuck in that sort of paradigm that, and I do think public awareness is very important, and that is definitely a very important part of the answer. But at the same time, like, systemic change in our economy is really what we need to look at, because there are these underlying motivations for child labor in any industry, like such as poverty, inequality, economic desperation. I mean, like, all the different factors that lack of opportunity, right, that could lead to this situation, really need to be addressed as root causes, as opposed to, this being up to the whims of whether the public thinks that it matters or doesn't matter, because, that can obviously lead to stagnation, in any, depending on the political moment. So I think just always bearing that in mind as well, the systemic issues and the importance of systemic change.
Absolutely. Yes, and Vashti adds that there is the opportunity of education to get kids out of that cycle, but it works for some and it does not work for all. And so it's not fair to put that on the kids, like, you don't have to be in poverty if you can just finish high school.
Right, exactly. Like, here's your homework, like, as soon as you leave the fields, or, as long as you're completing this grade or something. Yeah. And I mean, that dynamic as well has always been present. So, I mean, educators, the rise of a public education system in the United States, that all was a kind of going on parallel to the child labor reform movement.
So as long as we can keep that I guess that's part of it, is to keep that healthy. And also migrant education is very important to try to keep children from falling through the cracks of the educational system. And systemic change in agricultural laws would mean overhauling many views of this country, like racism and capitalism. That's from Vashti, and I agree wholeheartedly. Hard question. From Reed, I believe, Child Labor Coalition. He says, how do we tackle the myth of the farm, of the the myth of hard work, the value of hard work. How do we go about dismantling that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it has a strong hold in the American imagination. So, one of the things that occurred to me when I was, just looking at your questions and thinking about this interview was that this romanticization of farm labor goes deeper than the 1850s when my book begins and looks at kind of free labor ideology in the anti-slavery movement and the virtue of hard work and farm labor specifically. It goes back to the founding and the debates between Hamilton and Jefferson, and Thomas Jefferson's agrarian ideal of America being a nation of small farmers, and that this is what would make America different from Great Britain, that it would not be an industrial hellscape. I mean, he had this way of thinking of Great Britain, and that the industry wasn't something that led to virtue. And so I think there are so many deeply rooted kind of ideas about farm labor as being a source of virtue. I mean, for me, I'm an educator. I teach for a living. So I can't help but think that, pointing out the realities of the commercialized agriculture, and, that I can't help but think that that would make a difference, for combating this romantic ideal of farm labor. And I mean, there are just facts. I mean, I remember when I was writing the op-ed in 2012, facts about the hazardous nature of much of this labor in farm work as being even more hazardous than than a non-agricultural industries. And I think it is something that's being used constantly to prevent regulation. How do we combat it? Read my book, and I think encourage others to have a deeper understanding. It's a very superficial understanding of what farm labor is.
Exactly. If anyone missed it, I put Betsy's book, the link to her book, in the chat. It's available from the University of Illinois Press. Also everywhere where books are sold. You can find her book, just word search Upon the Altar of Work, and you'll find it. I took it out of the schooling bar because you can't click on that, and it's a pretty long link. So you can click on the one that's in the chat. And I think Reed's question was touching on the myth of the family farm as a safe place. And I grew up on a family farm, and I have to tell you, it is not a safe place. And I don't think any family farmers are under that impression. Maybe other people are, and I can't speak for them, but we knew how dangerous it was. My brother fell into one of those holes in the floor that has equipment underneath it, broke his leg. Could have been a lot worse. We were thankful that it was just his leg that got broken. My father fell and died from a roof on the farm. I have cousins who died when they were, very young, maybe teenagers or early 20s. They got their arms pulled and were pulled into the machinery and were killed. I have a cousin's next to my uncle who was very lucky, and his son, my cousin, was there to turn off the switch. But if he hadn't been, he would have also died. So this has really had a very real impact on my own life, and it kind of makes me angry that, and I should keep this out of the conversation, but it's always viewed as well, that was meant to be. There are dangers on the farm. You can't eliminate all of them. And it was meant to be, and it's heartbreaking, but they still would not welcome any further regulation on the farm. So it's very, very hard to break through that. But I feel like farm worker families, the ones that don't own the farm, have even less of a voice and more of a risk, because
yes,
the big farms where there's big applications of pesticides, that is really concerning for the kids. and their long-term health. So I could go on, but
yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And what I found as well in the kind of the history of this is the farm and the family farm was used as kind of a romanticized image to prevent agricultural regulations of labor, but it was also parental authority. So that was how, the family part of it is important, because what they were doing was pitting the idea of parents having authority against government authority. So there was a whole dynamic around the argument that whether the government had the authority to make the decision in the case of because it was a family, parents and their own children. So focusing on that relationship as opposed to the actual nature of the work itself was something I found was very common. And I'm assuming still that, because I remember seeing that. And I don't remember. I would name and shame if I remembered the names of all the people that opposed the Department of Labor regulations in 2012. But I can remember specifically there being a comment about, if the government can regulate this relationship between parents and children on their own family farm, then there will be no limit to what the government can do, or something along those lines. So I know that is still very much alive.
Exactly. And I should point out that none of the bills that have been introduced over the past 20 years have ever proposed regulating family farms. There's always that exception.
Yes. And the FLSA exempted, it was a pretty large group, but it exempted any children working for their own families from any of the child labor provisions in the FLSA.
Yes. So I want to make that clear that even if the CARES Act were passed tomorrow, families would be free to employ their children that own their farms as much as they want,
Exactly.
So I'm sorry I forgot off on the tangent, but
no.
And it's true. I feel like these tragedies, though, that happen in my own family happen in farm worker families too. But because they don't have that power to change the situation in their employment, that is why advocates step up and push as hard as we do and as hard as we can to keep trying to change that law, because they can't change the rules on the farms where they work. So.
Right.
So I think we've covered all the questions that I hoped to, and I have the link to the book. So I think that's everything, unless I miss any questions in the chat. It's been pretty active, so I hope I didn't miss anything. But Betsy, do you have anything else to add?
Gender was the only thing that we didn't get to talk about at all, or not much. And it was another dynamic that I talk about in the book. So some people may find that interesting, that in addition to race and there being a kind of hierarchy of victimization and in this movement and opposition, gender was also an important way of shaping and this debate in a way that people understood the issue, so that whenever opponents were the most successful, they were focusing on boys and the healthy nature of this labor, excuse me, for boys. And then reformers would strike back with girls in factories. So they had this battle going on: the boy on the farm, but the girl in the factory, and kind of a dynamic of kind of progressive era gender politics.
Very interesting. We could talk about this all day, as far as I'm concerned.
There's no end.
And I want to just recognize everyone's comments. Jesus said that she had a cousin who was crushed in the tomato fields. The tractor was backing up and didn't see him. He was sleeping. And there was a lot of yelling at the tractor driver to stop. And she looked up. Everyone was running and then crying because he had been run over. and we get, the alerts from our partners in Marshfield Clinic, I think it is, in Minnesota. They keep tabs on agricultural injuries, and there's a lot. It's kind of depressing to open up your email and read them. It's heartbreaking, every single one that we see. And that's why we do what we do, is to try to change that, move the conversation forward. And I really appreciate your help with that, Betsy, because just with your book and with this conversation and your articles and op-eds, you're helping to change that conversation. You're bringing the academic world a little bit into the popular consciousness to help move that forward. So I really appreciate it.
Can't even tell you how happy it makes me to hear that, because that's what I hope to do. And thank you for your work as well.
You're very welcome. All right, thank you. And just to remind everyone that you can see us again next week, 12:30 right here on Children in the Fields campaign. Thank you so much to Betsy, and we'll see you later.
Thank you, Kendra.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye.